Hello. Hello, this is Mr. Fogassi, not Mr. Trokin today for a surprise screencast. Today we're going to be looking at the Boston Massacre, and if you recognize that theme song, it is actually from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. Of course, these are two different types of massacres, one you could even call really not so much a massacre. So how this really unfolded was even really before March 5th of 1770. Bostonians, have already resented the presence of these foreign soldiers from England. But really, it goes deeper than that. Many of the British soldiers already stationed in Boston were so poorly paid that they had to find part-time jobs in order to meet just even their basic needs. So in doing so, you see that the soldiers are competing and in some cases taking away jobs from the colonists. So the competition over jobs, along with the Townshend Acts, which we discussed in class today, is still very much fresh in their minds. So on this particular night, a crowd is going to quickly assemble along a number of soldiers, and they begin pelting the soldiers with a variety of materials, everything from stones, ice, snow, chunks of coal even. And as a result, the soldiers are under attack in some ways, and they fire upon the crowd, following more of a skirmish than really a massacre. The soldiers wind up killing 5 male civilians and injuring 6 others. And while, again, this is called a massacre, I mean, when you think of that word, you're thinking maybe hundreds, maybe thousands who would be killed. But really, this is an opportunity for propaganda to be heavily utilized, especially by Samuel Adams as well as Paul Revere. And you see this depiction here of the Boston Massacre here. And again, it's heavily tilted toward the colonists, who were great masterminds of propaganda in many ways, in which colonists throughout would view this and see the British redcoats as being violent, just firing upon the colonists for no reason. It almost looks like it's orchestrated here, as you see by this general here waving, almost encouraging the line of redcoats to just fire upon these quote-unquote innocent men who are in the crowd. And here's a better look at this particular depiction. And I don't know if you can make out, but there's a dog at the very bottom of this depiction. And the purpose of putting the dog, supposedly, was that the dog was actually going to sort of lick up the blood of the wounds of the colonists, again, to sort of invoke a very emotional reaction. And it certainly does, as Paul Revere and Samuel Adams are very good at using this particular incident as propaganda to fuel animosity throughout the colony. Interestingly enough, the soldiers are actually going to go to trial. 8 of them are put on trial, and out of the 8, 2 are going to be found guilty of manslaughter because there was evidence that they had supposedly fired directly into the crowd. But the punishment for these convicted soldiers was just a simple branding of the thumb in open court. But nevertheless, the whole theme here is propaganda. Now, most of the Townshend Act taxes that were discussed in class today are going to eventually be repealed, but of course it's not going to be soon without its consequences. Following this, the next major event is the Boston Tea Party, certainly one of the more infamous ones that's going to occur leading up to the American Revolution, the Boston Tea Party, December 16th of 1773. And really what's going on here is the colonies are boycotting British tea because, again, the British are insisting on their right to tax. So the British East India Company at this point is really in dire straits financially. So Parliament passes the Tea Act in 1773, which, interestingly enough, made the price of tea even cheaper than the smuggled tea that was being brought into the colonies from the Dutch. However, the colonists were very afraid that if they purchased the tea, then in doing so they would be recognizing Parliament's right to tax the colonies. Again, even though this tea was much cheaper, they did not want to recognize Parliament's ability to tax, as this could eventually lead to other goods and possibly even services being taxed. So the British East India Company will ship a shipment of tea back into the Boston Harbor. There's no buyer, so it's just sitting there. So what happens is you have a bunch of colonists disguise themselves as Native Americans, and they board the ship, and they dump about 340 chests of tea, which would be well over $1 million worth. and they're just dumping it into the Boston Harbor. And you see the sort of the reaction here in this picture, and you see, again, they're dressed up as Native Americans. Now, while again this invokes a positive reaction amongst many Bostonians, it is also important to keep in mind that others thought that this went too far, that the destruction of private property was almost considered radical. Again, keep in mind that the colonists are not completely unified, and we'll definitely see that even leading up to the Revolutionary War, that not all colonists are really for the unification of the 13 colonies. Some are still very much loyal to Great Britain. So undoubtedly, we're going to see a reaction from England. And one of the most important things that we see coming from England is the passing of the Intolerable Acts. And this is a series of acts. And it's also known as the Coercive Acts of 1774. But the biggest thing here is that they're going to shut down the Boston Harbor. And this was basically directed at punishing the people of Boston for their actions done during the Boston Tea Party, mainly until they make restitution. So some of the main highlights of this: they're going to close the port of Boston, prohibiting trade in and out until the destroyed tea was paid for, so all restitution would have to be made. The power of the Massachusetts legislature is going to be decreased, while we're going to see the power of the royal governor increased. No surprise there. In addition, royal officials who are going to be accused of crimes, they're going to be tried back in Great Britain instead of within the colonies, so you won't have the colonists basically rendering, serving on juries or rendering justice in some way. And then the fourth main highlight of this is going to be the expansion of the Quartering Act, in which the British troops are going to be allowed to be quartered in private homes. Again, it's going to now apply to all colonies. And if you know your Bill of Rights, the Third Amendment there, of course, is directed at the Quartering Act. So again, the Intolerable Acts are a major reaction to the Boston Tea Party. And again, you're going to see things like effigies being burned of King George III. Now this Join or Die cartoon is really, keep that in mind, going back to the French and Indian War. Now it's going to eventually take on a new meaning. We're not just going to be unified now in helping the British during the French and Indian War. Now this is going to take on an entirely new meaning, uniting against the English this time around. So again, it's interesting how that does change. Alrighty, thank you for listening, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.